Hi there, Nita here. Let's get into this watercolor stitch situation. I'm not using watercolor paint. I'm using tissue paper. So how did I get that perfect stitch drawing? I used graphite paper. So I put the shiny side down on my watercolor paper and then put my image of stitch on top. And using the handle end of my paintbrush, I traced the entire design. You can use like a colored pencil. My food's done. Um, because that can help you see where you've drawn, you know. If you see that, let's say you use yellow colored pencil and you're tracing the image, um, if you see yellow, you know you already drew there. But I decided to use the end of my paintbrush, so I'll need to lift the graphite paper to see if it traced the entire design. And if you're not so confident in your ability to make sure that the image doesn't shift, instead of just holding it down, you can tape one side of the paper, the graphite paper, and the image. So now as we are laying down the tissue paper first, I am just applying water. I really like this craft because you're not using paint, which makes it less of a messy activity. So just lay down water where you want the color to go and then get the color paper and place it there. My strategy for this was to use the tissue papers in ascending order. So whichever color I needed the least, those were the colors that I used first. And what I was hoping to do was to avoid the color that I needed the most, the darker blue, from overpowering all of the areas where, there's pink or purple or red. I wanted those colors to I wanted the pink and purple to be pink and purple or red. Um, so that's what I was doing. And you want to make sure that you get the whole area nice and wet under the tissue paper. Um, because if you miss spots, if you let spots get dry, then it won't bleed into the watercolor paper. And that is watercolor's superpower. It's how it bleeds and creates these, imperfect edges. So I'm just going to keep going, applying the water and then the tissue paper on top. And this isn't just tissue paper like you would buy in the party aisle. This is specifically bleeding tissue paper. This paper is much thinner, believe it or not, than the stuff that you'll find in a party aisle for gifts and things. But could you use that? Yes, you can. I haven't tried it yet, so I don't know how effective using that tissue paper is. But the one that I am using now, it is very thin and intended to get really bleedy. So now after I've laid down all of the tissue papers, you can really see my stitch coming through. It's looking a little zombie-ish, but I'm going back over all of the tissue paper with more water. Remember, I don't want to have any dry spots because if there is a space where that tissue paper is dry, again, it's not going to bleed. And if it doesn't bleed, then your watercolor paper is not going to pick up that color. So, one of the things you want to make sure you avoid while doing this part is creating puddles. And I did end up adding too much water in some areas. I was feeling a little insecure about um, the bleeding abilities. So I just went in with the tissue paper and touched the puddle and just leave it there for a moment. You can see right here because the tissue paper will just suck up the water like a straw. So you don't end up ruining your image. So while you're waiting for this to dry, you can do the background. Now, could you do the background first? Yes, you absolutely could. Um, but then what would you be doing while you're waiting for it to dry? I guess another project. So because I added so much water, I did a very detailed background. This was not what I had intended to do. I wanted to do um like just a bunch of like different swirly colors, which wouldn't have taken long, just kind of some random lines and things. But like I said, I got the paper a little more wet than I should have. So I decided to do a pretty detailed background. And I really encourage you to use different tints and tones and shades of the same color to really add more life to your drawings. A lot of the children that I teach, they say, "Oh my gosh, yours looks so realistic." And it's because I'm using multiple colors. Even if it's obviously a cartoon, like this is obviously not a very realistic tree, but by using the different greens and the different browns, the tree looks more and more interesting. And also strategically placing like lighter colors where the sun would be hitting and darker colors where the shadows are showing also helps add interest. So I'm just going over um, with the same family of colors basically. Now my clouds, I I take great. I have. I do not like the way that I make clouds. I'm okay with the way I face paint clouds, but drawing and painting on paper is just difficult for me when it comes to clouds. So I used the negative space technique where I didn't draw the clouds, I just colored the sky. Um, and then I use a little bit of gray to kind of bring out the dimension in the clouds. So my drawing was seeming a little flat, so I just went and did a little black outline, which makes sense because we're going to go over the stitch with a black Sharpie. So everything is nice and cohesive. But then when I added that black, I'm like, the sky doesn't have black. Now it does. We got birds in the sky. So now we're going to carefully lift the watercolor paper. When it's totally dry, it'll just fall off, right? You could just blow it and the water and the um, tissue paper will just fall off. But my page was still a little bit damp, and I was not very patient. So you see me going to grab my paper towel and just dabbing, like pressing into the paper. And you can see there is that white space there because I didn't get that um part of the watercolor paper, the tissue paper, wet, even though I created puddles. But it's fine, this adds interest. It does add interest. Now, before you go in with your permanent marker, you want to make sure it's as dry as possible. A little bit damp is probably a little risky because getting your Sharpies or your permanent markers wet will ruin them. So make sure your paper is dry before you start drawing. And this is where that graphite outline comes in real handy. You just trace it again. And there were some areas where I couldn't quite see the graphite anymore. So make sure when you are tracing, you're pressing firmly, not too firmly where you tear the paper, but firmly enough so you can really see the drawing when it comes time to outline it with Sharpie. Um, and then also having the drawing, the reference readily available will help you fill in those gaps where you couldn't see the sketch from the graphite paper. And golly, look how adorable! Oh, I just love this. And you can do this with any drawing, with any drawing. All right, have fun and keep creating.